It seemed to be a quiet night as I wiped down the bar for the 40th time in what would probably become 400 or more evenings. There were probably only 8 or 9 women in the bar when he walked in. He sat down at the counter, turning his head, but there was something familiar about him. All the women in the room turned to look at him when he entered. Men don't appear here often. This bar caters to a very select clientele. Most of our clients are women, and most of them are gay. I get hit on here a lot. Maybe that's why I'm staying here. Everyone needs to feel attractive to someone from time to time. The problem is that only women who love women flirt with me. I definitely like men. I'm not interested in women at all. I'm not just not curious, I'm basically not interested in women. All the women who hit on me always tell me that I won't know if I like it or not until I try. When I explain to them that I was born with an innate love for men, they look at me like I'm crazy. The problem is that while all of these statements are true, none of this has happened for a very long time. It's been so long since I've had sex with men that it feels like I've never had sex. The problem is that I just don't attract men. My face is fine. I'm quite beautiful. I'm probably not as beautiful as I used to be, but tragedy leaves traces, especially if the tragedy happened through your fault. It seems that my face, although it is not disfigured or disfigured, simply carries this sadness in its expressions. My body, on the other hand, is the source of all my problems. At 29 years old, I have the same curves as a 10-year-old boy. My ass is as flat as a plate of water. My legs also return to their bony state, and I am an honorary member of the Small Breasts Club. My breasts just never grew. I don't have hips either. Growing up, I couldn't hold a hula hoop to save my butt. There just weren't enough curves to hold the hoop. A couple of minutes later, I see this guy raise his hand and wave to 2 girls at a table in the far corner. They get up laughing and go to the bar to pick it up. I'm wondering what the hell is going on here. I've seen these women here several times. Hell, we literally had to pull them away from each other a couple of times when they got too excited. They just don't seem like the type to walk both sides. I have seen some female couples who sometimes bring a man for a change. And many couples bring a man to get one of them pregnant if they want a child and cannot afford conventional medical methods. But these two just didn't seem like the types to bring a man for anything. The tall one hugged his arm and pressed herself against him. She seemed a little drunk already. The shorter, plumper of the pair seemed more distant, but she also hugged his arm. They led him to their table, and I continued to watch out of pure curiosity. He seemed like a pretty nice guy, although I hadn't seen his face directly yet. He seemed a little nervous about where he was. Perhaps it was because most of the women in the room were looking at him. Some did it on the sly, while others just openly stared at him. If he was expecting a warm welcome, he was clearly in the wrong place. Then I saw one of the girls wave. It was too early for the waitresses to be at work, so out of pure curiosity, I walked up to their table. Usually, I would just wait for one of them to come up to the bar to order drinks, but I was dying to know what was going on here. Did this guy know that he had zero chance of picking up one of these two? Maybe he was related to one of them. Maybe he was trying to say, I love you and will accept your lifestyle to keep you in my life. In any case, as I said, I was dying of curiosity. Besides, it was a quiet night, and I needed something to occupy my mind to keep me awake. I walked towards their table, as far as possible for a woman with an almost non-existent ass. He then turned, and his soft brown eyes bore into mine as he began to speak. Suddenly, I felt as if I was falling into a long, dark tunnel with no hope of rescue or escape. The past 2 years melted away as if they had never happened, and all the pain returned as if no time had passed. All those months spent in therapy were in vain. It was as if I had been wounded, and the wound had not been stitched up. I just put a plaster over the huge wound, and it was covered with the thinnest crust. When I met him, it was like I tore off this band-aid and completely tore off the scab. The huge, still bleeding wound was exposed again and hurt just as much. I don't remember what he ordered, but I knew what to bring him. He recognized me at that moment, and his discomfort with being in this bar tripled. His face didn't change except for a tiny drop in the corners of his mouth. His eyes barely changed either, other than a slightly harder expression. A normal observer would probably have missed these tiny changes, but to me they were as obvious as the fact that he simply didn't belong here. I turned and walked back to the bar, so excited by the sight of him that I forgot to ask if the two women wanted anything. As I searched the bar's huge refrigerator for his favorite beer, I felt my heart begin to flutter. At first I prayed for sanity because I realized none of this mattered. Years of therapy, long periods of loneliness, nothing matters. It seemed that meeting him after so long gave me a chance to correct the mistakes of the past and make my life what it should have been. It was as if I had been exiled from life for 2 years, and now, after serving my time in purgatory, I was summoned back to life. Fate has given me another chance, I thought, as I grabbed the coldest bottle of Dos Equis amber I could find. This was no coincidence. The forces of the universe came together to give me another chance. Of all the bars in the world, he had to go into mine. As I looked across the slowly filling room, I realized that this might be my only chance to talk to him. Fortune favors the brave, so I decided to take a risk. After all, what do I have to lose? I returned to his table with a beer in my hand, and as I passed it to him, I whispered, "Rick, you're wasting your time. You won't get any of these women. They are gay, but I, on the other hand, will give you whatever you want." I returned to my seat at the bar before he could respond. I felt his eyes boring into my back as I walked back to the bar. I wondered what would happen next. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him watching me. And while I was doing this, I was thinking about the events of the past that led us here. I grew up in a small town, a happy and normal girl, until puberty hit. It seemed to overtake everyone around me except me. While all the other girls were developing, I just kept growing upward like a beanstalk. Even in terms of growth, I was deprived. I only grew to 5 feet 5 inches. This was the average height for women of my time. Throughout school, while others were experimenting, I just kept doing what I had always done. I wasn't interested in illegal substances or sex. This may be due to the fact that my parents instilled in me from a very young age that illegal substances were bad. As for sex, I just had no interest. At 16, I was still more interested in collecting Barbie dolls than boys. 4 years later, in college, at the very late age of 20, my hormones finally kicked in with a vengeance. I started putting on makeup and trying to look better. It was not difficult because, as I said, I am relatively beautiful and also slim. But somehow it took me almost a year to experience sex for the first time. I was 21 years old and becoming a future pincushion. The problem was that there weren't many guys who wanted to use the pad. I went to parties and sometimes found drunk guys who would give me what I wanted. But I immediately noticed that, despite all the talk about how wonderful sex was, for me it wasn't. At the same time, I met new people by going to parties. One of the people I met was someone I already knew. The Ian's family lived in our town, just a mile from me. I knew him and his sisters and brothers since I could walk. It's funny that I never paid serious attention to him. He was the youngest of Ian's children. Surprisingly, we went to the same school and went to college around the same time, but we never spoke to each other. It was a tradition in their family to name the boys after their grandfather, who was one of the first settlers in our city. Charles Ans, or Charlie, and as he was called, was the first in everything in our city. He was the first settler. He ran the first business. He bought his first gun. He had the first farm. He built the first church and the first school. Charlie Ens was a legend among the Swedes who settled in our area. My Charlie, like most of the men in his family, was called by his middle name. Some people called them by their first and patronymic names to distinguish them from each other. His cousin's name was Charles Robert Ans, and he was called Charlie Rob. His name was Charles Richard in Roman III, so everyone called him Charles Richard, and his friends called him Charles Dickens. I just called him Rick, and from the first time I met him, I knew there was something special about him. I think I've come out of my desperation phase for sex that started in my 20s and was looking for something more. I knew a lot of guys. There were a few that I had secret sex with from time to time, but there was never a real relationship. Believe me, it's not because I didn't try. I went from subtle hints that I liked a guy to the point of directly saying after sex that if he were my boyfriend, he could have sex with me whenever he wanted. But I had no takers. On campus, where even some plus-size girls had boyfriends, no one wanted to be my boyfriend. Until Rick showed up. From the very beginning, I was attracted to him, and the feeling was mutual. Being with him was liberating. I didn't feel afraid. There were two things that could threaten a woman when she met a man. He could kill me, or he wanted to have sex with me. Looking into his eyes, I could tell that he would never hurt me, and I wanted to have sex with him no less than he wanted with me. He gave me back that sexual excitement that I thought was gone. The only thing that stopped us from moving on to sex was him. We met at a party. We sat on the couch for hours, just talking while people came and went. After an hour or two, I began to wonder when he would make his move. I had a certain reputation at those parties. When he finally made up his mind, I was both annoyed and puzzled, but intrigued. He asked me out on a date. This shocked me. He really wanted to spend time getting to know me. The next evening, we met and went to dinner. After dinner, we went for a walk along the lake. It was wonderful. I was sure that after this, he would want to have sex with me. He spent money and time on me. Damn, he had a point, in my opinion, but he was content to hold my hand. After a few dates, I became desperate. But at the same time, I didn't call anyone else. In fact, a couple of my regular friends called me, and I refused. When it finally happened, it was incredible. I came to his apartment to ask if we could go somewhere. He smiled and nodded. The problem was that neither of us had a car, and it was snowing outside. We decided to stay home and order pizza. We were watching a movie on cable that neither of us had ever seen before. It was a scary movie, and although I didn't like those kinds of movies, there was no place I wanted to be more. He held my hand during scary moments. After a while, I began to wish there were more of them. When it got cold and late, he pulled out a blanket, and we snuggled together on his couch. Then we made love. I just lost control. I wanted to give him everything I had. I wanted to try to make us one being. Suddenly, everything became clear. There was no need for words or anything. I knew then that I loved him. From that moment on, I never returned to the dormitories. If one or both of us weren't in class or at work, we were never apart, and that's how my life with Rick began. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You get the picture. Either way, I was madly in love with him. There was nothing I wouldn't do for him. We graduated, found jobs, and eventually got married. We didn't have to move because from the night we made love for the first time, we never slept separately again. Like most young couples, we had a bunch of friends with whom we hung out and talked. And I think that was part of my problem, both before and after marriage. Rick had a group of friends with whom he was very close. I could see that these were the friends he could stick with for the rest of his life. I imagine them playing video games and sports now, and later in life playing cards or golf together. I was glad that he had friends, but they didn't love me. At first, they just nodded and smiled. After a few dates, they started asking him why he was spending so much time with me. When they found out that we weren't sleeping together and that we were actually dating, they began to question his sanity. They also pointed out my shortcomings and other girls who were better built and available, and who their friends said he liked. They had several colorful ways of describing me. They often told him that my body looked the same from the front and back. Or they asked how he could tell if he was stroking my back or my front in the dark. But Rick silenced them by telling them that he not only loved me, but that he loved everything about me just the way it was. I almost burst with happiness when he told them this. If before I loved him, then after that my feeling became almost worship. The good thing was that his friends accepted his choice and left me alone. Of course, from time to time they offered other girls when one of them broke up, but for the most part we were left alone. Rick surrounded me with love. He never just had sex with me, it was always special. When we were together, I felt like the happiest girl on the planet. My favorite time of the day was always when we went to bed, and he would cuddle me before bed. "Rick, dear, I don't have breasts. How can you like my body?" I said. He smiled. "Whatever it is, it's mine, and I like it," he said seriously. "Rick, do you want it?" I asked, whining. "No," he said. "I'm angry at you." "I will do whatever you want," I said. We both knew that I would do whatever he wanted one way or another, but that was part of the game. The first time we went through it was the most shocking. He looked at me with a crazy expression on his face. "Repeat after me," he said seriously. "I love my body," he said. "I love my body," I repeated, without confidence. "Rick loves my body," he said firmly. "Rick loves my body," I repeated. "When you're 50 and all the women you've been jealous of are fat, you'll be grateful for your body," he said, hugging me and starting to undress me. Over time, as we got jobs, it became clear that we would always live comfortably, but we would never become Bill and Melinda Gates. We were firmly in the middle of the middle class. We never had to struggle to put food on the table, and we always paid our bills on time, but there were few luxuries, and we didn't have much in the bank. It was an unexpected wealth that both delighted us and ruined our idyllic life. We often stopped for coffee at 7-Eleven on the way to work. It was on the road where Rick was turning left to go north and I was turning right to go south. We always bought the same thing every morning for breakfast. Rick had black coffee and a cinnamon roll. I took espresso and a bagel. One morning Rick bought a lottery ticket. He didn't understand why he did it. We both laughed at the people who spent money on these tickets every day and never won. I often told Rick that they were basically paying for the dream, not the ticket. They spend all day dreaming about what they will do with the money if they win. Rick pointed out that over time, if they saved that money or invested it, they would have even more money, and they would probably still be able to get what they dreamed of. So I really think he was just being an asshole or laughing at them when he bought the ticket. Funny thing is, it wasn't even a Giga Millions ticket or some other big lottery ticket. It was just our local state lottery, and the prize was only $100,000. We didn't even react when we saw it on the news the next day. A couple of days later, we heard that the winning ticket had not been claimed. We just shrugged our shoulders and said that the person who won must be stupid or something. A few days later, we found out that the ticket had been purchased at our 7-Eleven and began to wonder which of the people who bought tickets there had won. We came up with a brilliant strategy to determine which of those fools it was. We watched them to see which of them stopped buying tickets. Then they noticed that they were all still clinging to the dream of winning one day, so they decided that it must be someone who bought tickets at a different time of the day. The winning numbers were displayed in the store as a badge of honor. Rick was cleaning his car and throwing out old receipts and trash when he noticed his ticket, which he had thrown into the ashtray immediately after purchasing it. When we looked at it together, the numbers seemed familiar. We were about to throw the ticket away with the rest of the trash when we noticed that all the numbers matched. We looked at each other and started screaming. We only screamed for 1 second before we panicked and started looking around. Any of the people around could kill us for this ticket. Rick hugged me and kissed me. That night, on his way home from work, Rick stopped at the state lottery office. He was photographed as the winner, but there was no big fuss because the prize wasn't that big. When we got home, Rick told me that after taxes we had $60,000 left. "How much money do you want?" he asked. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Lucy, this money is not enough to make a real difference in our lives," he began. "We can't quit our jobs or buy a big house or anything like that for that amount of money. So we're going to put some aside for a rainy day. But I think each of us should buy that one thing, no matter how expensive, that will make our lives better in some way. One small dream," he said. "I already know what I want, so how much money do you need for your dream?" "I already have my dream, fool," I said. "I have you. You make me happier than anything in the world." "Well, think about it," he said. "Then just buy it." Rick came home the next evening with the biggest smile I'd seen on his face since I said yes to his proposal. He bought a shiny red 2009 Mustang GT. The car was loud and aggressive, and it had always been his dream. Personally, I would choose a convertible, but guys always want a coupe. Now it's your turn, he said, smiling. I love you, Lucy Manette. Do something to make yourself happy. My name is Lucy Ann's, I said. I took your last name when we got married, and there's one little thing I really want. Actually, I thought about this for a long time. I didn't tell him what I was going to do. I just said that I would probably be gone for the night, and that I would change. You're going to Paris to shop in those stupid stores you're always talking about, right? He asked. Honey, as much as I'd like to, I can't go to Paris to shop and come back overnight, I said. Just let me surprise you. My dream is as much for you as it is for me, and I think you'll like it. I made an appointment for that morning and showed up on Thursday. I returned home on Friday morning, and from the moment I got out of the taxi, I had to take painkillers. I told Rick he needed to take a taxi back and bring my car home, and then I went to bed. Are you drunk, Lucy? He asked. No, I smiled. I'm just in a lot of pain. I'm trying to wean myself off painkillers. The scars should disappear in a few weeks. What scars? He asked. Honey, just bring my car. We'll talk when you get back, I said. I put on a voluminous coat to hide my figure so he couldn't tell. When he came back, he was so worried that I had to tell him. Rick, sit down, honey, I said. He sat down where I told him to and looked at me. He was worried about me, and at the time I didn't think it was important. But now I understand that his concern was justified. While he was gone, I put on a loose robe, but to tell the truth, I was going to take it off as soon as possible. He looked at me strangely, and I think even before I took off my robe, he already knew. When the robe fell, he saw that I had enlarged my breasts, and I didn't just increase my cup size by one. I had real, almost stripper-sized DD breasts. When they were naked, his face went through many expressions. I expected him to say, wow or damn. But what he really said was, why? His face was a mask of worry. I realized then that I had greatly underestimated the depth of Rick's love for me. He was worried about everything. He wanted to know about the health risks. He wanted to know about possible foreign tissue rejection. He wanted to know about infections and complications and whether the implants would irritate the muscles and tissues they touched. Will they freeze in winter? He asked me hundreds of questions and never really looked at them. His eyes never left mine. He then returned to his first question, which I never answered. He wanted to know why I did it. We sat down at the table and talked about it. I tried to explain to him that for most of my adult life, I had problems with body image. I've never been proud of my body. I've never felt comfortable in my own skin. This is the same thing that makes some people choose gender reassignment surgery. He looked at me like I was crazy. And then there's you, I said. I never wanted you to have huge breasts, he said. No, honey, you didn't mean to, I explained. But I want you to be proud when you walk down the street with me. I've always been proud, he said. This is different, Rick, I said. You are proud of me because you love me. It's the same reason why you drove and took care of the old Toyota for so many years. It was a reliable car, and we had no choice. But as soon as we could afford it, you bought a Mustang, and you really love that car, and you're proud to drive it. I noticed that now when you go somewhere with friends, you volunteer to drive, which you didn't do before. He nodded. Well, Rick, I'm yours too, and I want you to be proud to walk down the street with me. I want to be the human female equivalent of your machine. Instead of driving an old Toyota, you're racing in a Mustang. So instead of going with a woman who looks like a boy, I want you to be that guy who is married to a woman with big breasts. I want all your friends and everyone we meet to be jealous of what you play with every night. At first, after the pain and redness went away, nothing much changed. People who had known me for a long time were, of course, shocked. But I began to notice that everyone who saw me was looking at me. Then, as before, I was almost invisible. Now everyone saw me. In some cases, however, they saw me wrong. People I had worked with for years and who I thought respected my intelligence suddenly started treating me like I was stupid. Apparently, big breasts and brains don't go together. and men who had never paid me any attention suddenly began to treat me better than they ever had before. I, of course, started buying completely different clothes to show them off. It has become more difficult to buy clothes too. In many cases, if I bought a suit, I had to buy a skirt or pants and a top in different sizes. There was also the problem that my legs were still skinny and my butt was missing, but I had a big top. I liked the effect I had on some men. I loved seeing them crash into walls or fall, distracted by my breasts. I especially loved seeing how Rick's old friends redefined my opinion of themselves when we had our usual barbecues or parties. Now all the guys wanted to look at me or talk to me, and the women treated me like the enemy. I didn't notice at first, but something had changed between me and Rick too. If I had been more attentive to the reactions of the person who loved me most, none of this might have happened. We still made love much more often than the average couple, but our sleeping positions, while not much different, were different. We still slept cuddled together, but now his hands usually rested on my stomach. At first, I thought he was afraid my breasts were still hurting, but even weeks after the surgery, he didn't touch them. When we made love, it still felt amazing. But he didn't touch my breasts anymore. Again, I thought it was because he didn't want to hurt me, but looking back, I see I was wrong. It was about a month after the surgery that this started happening. One of the guys at my job followed me into the warehouse and locked the door behind us. Bart was known throughout the office as a ladies' man, but he never paid any attention to me. "I'm tired of you teasing me," he said. Without asking permission, he simply extended his hand to me. I was so shocked that I just stood there with my mouth open. "I would do anything to see them," he said, and quickly left. I stood there with my mouth open, not knowing how to react. Then I smiled because it didn't feel like a violation. Actually, I thought it was a compliment. The grown man was so delighted with me that he could not help himself. After being ignored for most of my life, the surgery turned me into some kind of sex goddess. Part of me admitted that what he did was wrong, but the other part was pleased. Not the opportunity to have sex with him, I would never do that. But a feeling of strength, knowing that men want me. Honestly, it didn't hurt anyone. His wife will never know, and neither will Rick. Besides, he just touched something that wasn't really a part of me. It was just plastic bags of saline solution inserted under my skin. It also boosted my confidence and self-esteem, so it couldn't be that bad. I'm not a stupid woman, and I knew it was wrong. But this little gray area has proven to be a powerful balancing act for all those people who have ignored me or made mean remarks over the years. I thought I deserved some compensation. My downfall was not due to one huge mistake. Bart was a master of this kind of thing. He brought me to this point through a series of small but increasingly significant steps. After the first time at the warehouse, he started inviting me to dinners with a group of his friends who were eating together. In all the years I worked there, I was never invited, not once. It made me feel special. The second step was that every time I walked into the warehouse or walked up the stairs, Bart was always there. His attention to me became more and more insistent. The first few times I objected a lot, but over time my objections became weaker and weaker, and as I said, this gave me a feeling of strength, and it did not harm Rick. But after a week or so we were caught. Another employee entered the warehouse and saw us. The new employee looked shocked at first, but the next time I went to get the staplers, he came over and promised that if I let him do what Bart did, he wouldn't tell anyone what he saw. I had to reluctantly agree. I needed my job, and besides, if I got fired, Rick would find out. Bart continued to insist on sex all this time. I refused every time. I told him that the only man I've ever done this for is my husband, and it will always be that way. Bart was still able to convince me to have sex. "But this is the last time you touch me." I think I realized then who I had become. Through a series of small steps, he transformed me from a faithful wife into a woman of easy virtue. I'm not stupid, and I realized that all the other men were his friends, and it was no coincidence that they caught us. I realized that if I had not woken up, in a few weeks I would have become their woman of the lungs. And Denia, they'd line me up after work, and I'd just be another woman with a bad reputation in the office. Our boss caught us. I hit Bart in the face. "Don't you dare talk to me anymore," I spat. "Do not come to me. Don't touch me. And don't come near me ever again." "You can be as angry as you want," he grinned. "I already had sex with you, and honestly, it wasn't that good. Apart from these huge breasts, you are nothing. I'll find someone better. There are always a lot of women of easy virtue. Who knows, maybe I'll tell your husband so he can find out who he's married to. And I'll tell your wife what kind of man she chose," I hissed. He simply nodded and walked away laughing. Over the next few days, I avoided going to the warehouse and did not have lunch with the group again. A few men tried to drop hints, but I just didn't talk to them anymore. I ate lunch alone at my desk and talked to Rick on the phone during lunch. I also became depressed because of what I had done. I didn't think my behavior had changed in those 2 to 3 months after the surgery, but thinking about all the things I had done, I realized that it had. That night at home, I received the first of 3 blows that would destroy me. I wanted to make it up to Rick without letting him know what I did. I thought intensely about my behavior in those few days after the last time with Bart and realized that I had seriously changed my relationship with the person I loved most. This isn't just a case of me letting Bart have sex with me. I wondered how stupid I was to let this happen when I had a man who loved me so much. I felt like a fool, and I was even more of a fool than I thought. Anyway, when I got home that night, I put on my sexiest lingerie and waited for Rick. When he arrived, I attacked him. "Guess what I want to do," I purred. "I can't guess," he smiled. "Rick," I said in a hoarse voice, "come here. I want to get pregnant right now." Suddenly, he stopped and sat down. He pulled away from me and looked at the floor. "Rick, what's wrong?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "You tell me." "What do you mean, dear?" I asked. I was sure he heard something. I thought that perhaps Bart had followed through on his threat and told him, but it turned out that things were worse. He walked over to the dresser and took out a pack of my pills from my drawer. "10 weeks ago, right after surgery, you told me you were going to stop taking them so we could have this baby you're talking about," he said. "When did you take your last pill?" I didn't say a word. "That was yesterday," he continued. He took one of the pills out of the container and handed it to me. "You forgot to take today's." I know it was only in my imagination, but the pill was so hot it almost burned my hand. "But Rick," I started. "At first, when I noticed it 3 weeks ago, I thought maybe you just changed your mind and decided we should wait a little longer. As much as I wanted us to have a family, it's your body. I thought you would say this sooner or later. But this game you're playing is just hurtful, Lucy." He got dressed and left. I cried as soon as he left. I heard his car start and drive away. It felt like God had crawled into my chest and ripped out my heart. Then I realized what I had done. Without even planning, I put my marriage at risk. I also realized that I was a fool. Sex with Bart was nothing compared to what I got from Rick every night. Bart and the others treated me like an object. Even when Bart had sex with me, he only cared about his own pleasure. All these guys cared about was their own pleasure. None of them knew me. When they looked at me, they didn't see me. They only saw big breasts. Once they had access to them or my body, I ceased to matter. All my life I dreamed of someone loving me the way Rick did. I wanted us to have a family and a beautiful home. It was everything I wanted. When Rick asked me about having a baby 6 weeks ago, I was ecstatic. But I think on some level, I knew that Bart or someone else might have sex with me, and I wanted to make sure I didn't get pregnant. I also have to admit that perhaps on some level I expected or even wanted this. I know it sounds bad, but maybe at one point in my life, I wanted to have the same power over men that most women gain at a young age. But I didn't want to sacrifice my marriage and my happiness for this passing hobby. It wasn't even a hobby. There were no emotions on both sides. It was only sex. I know it sounds stupid, even when I think about it. Just sex. I think about it like it meant nothing. It was even less than nothing. At least for me, it was less than nothing. I didn't care if I saw Bart again. But in reality, I made the most important decision of my life, because this insignificant little incident in the warehouse could destroy my marriage to the man I adored. At that time, Rick didn't know anything yet, I was sure of it. I needed to do something to make things right. When Rick got home, it was already dark, and I was watching TV. "I made your favorite dishes," I said as he closed the door. "I'll warm up some for you." "I ate at Burger King," he said quietly. I realized that something was still wrong. "Rick, can we talk?" I asked. He just sat down and looked at me. "I love you," I began. He rolled his eyes as if he didn't believe a word I said. This made me even more whiny, but I knew I had to hold on. "Rick, I guess I just wasn't sure about the baby at first, but—" He cut me off before I could finish the thought. "Lucy, you were the one who brought it up," he said. "I would never try to force you to do anything, and you know it. But don't worry about it. Never mind." He stood up and was about to leave the room. "What do you mean?" I asked. "What do you mean it doesn't matter anymore? Do you mean the misunderstanding is over?" He nodded and left. We didn't have sex that night. He barely touched me, and I needed that more than ever. I needed him for many reasons. First, after being used and abused by Bart, I needed to know that someone loved me. I needed to know that I was special for more than just my breasts. I also needed to know that our conflict was over and that he had forgiven me. But I also felt terribly guilty. There was also the problem that I really wanted to have a baby with him more than anything else. I was just trying to be careful, but I was never going to cheat again. My mom has been pestering me about grandchildren for months now. That was part of the reason I brought up the baby issue. I really wanted to see the little mix of Rick and I running around our house. So when we got into bed and he covered himself with the covers, trying to sleep, I looked at him strangely. "Are you tired or just playing hard to get?" I asked. He simply shrugged and closed his eyes. I wasn't going to leave him that easily. "Rick, you and I have something to do," I said, pulling the blanket off of him. He just looked at me and then walked towards the closet. He took a package out of his jacket pocket and began to open a new pack of pregnancy protection products. Fear gripped my heart. I began to wonder how much he actually knew. "I thought we were trying to have a baby," I said. "We can't get pregnant using this unless there's an accident." "We can't get pregnant while you're on the pill," he said sharply. "But I'm not sure now is the right time to have a family. Maybe we should." "Maybe we should do what?" I asked. I was furious now. He didn't say a word for several minutes. "Maybe we should just take a little time to figure out what each of us wants," he said. His implication was that we didn't want the same things and maybe we shouldn't be together. "Rick, don't you want to have a baby with me?" I asked directly. 6 weeks ago, this was what I wanted more than anything," he said. "But when I found the pills, I thought about a lot of things. Maybe we're not ready. Maybe we should." He trailed off. "One night without sex won't kill us," he said, and turned around again. I was more wounded than I had ever been in my life. Rick and I used to do something sexual almost every night. It wasn't always full-on sex. I knew it wouldn't last long, but it still hurt me. I think what made it more noticeable was that even when we were mad at each other, we always ended the night hugging each other. It was our bodily message to each other that despite our anger, we still belonged to each other. Not that night. He moved as far away as he could, and every time I rolled toward him, he moved even further until he fell off the bed and then simply muttered, "To the bathroom." He got up from the floor and left the room. I thought he was going to the bathroom, but he never came back. When I woke up in the morning, he was sleeping on the sofa. It was the first time since we got married that we didn't sleep together, except for that one night when I was in the hospital after surgery. It was the loneliest night of my life. While I was getting ready for work, he didn't get up, so I woke him up. "Rick, why didn't you come to bed last night?" I asked. "There didn't seem to be enough space," he said. I wanted to cry. "So are we going to 7-Eleven?" I asked. "I'm crying." "I'll pass," he said. "I love you, Rick," I said. "No matter what else happens or what misunderstandings we have, always remember this." Then I left so he wouldn't see my tears. The only thing that kept running through my head was that if my marriage ended, it would be my fault. I loved Rick more than anything in the world, and I took him for granted. I just assumed that I would never get caught, and that if I did it wouldn't be a big deal. I've known many couples where one of the partners had an affair and they stayed together. I realized during this trip that the problem is not staying together. My relationship with Rick has always been very strong. We never really fought. We had minor disagreements from time to time, but nothing like that. And he didn't even know what I did. My marriage was on the rocks because I was too stupid to hide my pills. No, that's not true. My marriage was in danger because I had to go out and show my new breasts to other men besides my husband. I was sure that we would have a difficult period, but we would get through it. I said it took 3 blows for my life to go downhill. When I arrived at work, I received a second blow. My boss called me into his office. I've never been in his office before. I've never been in trouble. My boss was the kindest, most down-to-earth person I've ever known. An example of this was that the day before, when he came in and saw Bart having sex with me, he quickly walked out and closed the door and never mentioned it again. When I entered his office, he was looking through some papers. "Close the door, Lucy," he said quietly. As soon as I closed the door, I had a feeling of fear. The only time his door was closed was either when the owners visited, or someone was fired or called to the carpet. He looked up from his papers and looked at me. I knew I had problems. "Lucy, yesterday," he began, "I was checking supplies on the second floor and found that the room was occupied." I nodded. "2 people who were married to others were using the room to have sex," he continued. I nodded. My first thought was that I was embarrassed. Then I got angry because both of you should have known better. I was thinking about firing both and putting it on your permanent records so future employers can see it if they ask for your work records or call to inquire about your time with us. Your spouse will also see this information if they try to find out why you were fired. I was in shock. My worst fears were starting to come true. Then I thought about it more and decided to live and let live. "After all, you are both adults, right?" I nodded. "Bart didn't force you into the room, right?" he asked. I shook my head. "I need you to say this," he pointed to the small tape recorder. "Why are you recording this?" I asked. "In case you decide to sue us for sexual harassment against Bart later," he said. "I'm thinking about not firing you." "It would be nice not to fire me," I smiled. Then I did something I would never have done before. I leaned forward to make my breasts more visible. I was sure he could see almost everything. "That brings me to the decision-making process," he said. "What do you have in mind?" I asked. "Well, Bart is a great salesman," he said. "I need his numbers to keep our sales up. That's why I'm not firing him." "Why should I not fire you?" I was shocked. "I'm just a clerk. Clerk's pennies per dozen. I might be inclined to leave you if you give me what Bart got," he said. "Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry, but I will never do this again," I said. "Yesterday was the first time I did this, and it will be the last. So if you need to fire me, go ahead." "That's not what I heard," he said sharply. "I heard that half of my male employees were playing with your body." I noticed that the tape recorder was turned off. "It's true," I said, "but Bart was the only one with whom it went this far. After yesterday, I realized that I was losing control, so I decided to stop. I should never have started. I love my husband, Mr. Stevens. I will never do anything to hurt him. I just never thought about it until yesterday." "So you quit before I got my chance." "This is unfair," he complained. "I didn't want to have sex with you. Who knows what you have down there? Bart has slept with so many women that I don't want to have sex with you. I just wanted my chance at those breasts. I think I'll make a decision later." "So this is what Jesus would do?" I asked. "Oh yes," he said quickly. "Jesus, being a man on earth, would also want these breasts." Again, I noticed that he didn't want to have sex with me. He thought that I was some kind of sick woman of easy virtue. He just wanted to play with my breasts. My husband was the only man who was not charmed by them. It was ironic. The person who paid for them, the person I made them for, the person who owned them was the only one who didn't want them. As I slowly walked back to my desk, I was confused. On the one hand, I was proud of myself for turning him down. I defended my principles. On the other hand, if I got fired, Rick would find out and I might lose him. If we add our drama with a child to the mix, my marriage could be over. I wondered what exactly he knew. And then his words that he didn't want to start a family, maybe never, really hurt me. I thought he was hinting that maybe he didn't want to start a family with me. I thought about it so much that I couldn't concentrate on my work. So, shortly before lunch, when everyone else had risen to eat lunch, I headed back to Mr. Stevens's office. He looked up when I walked in and closed the door. "I agree," I said sadly, "but only once." He started smiling, and I walked over and sat on his desk in front of him. "Damn, they're big," he muttered just as the door opened. Everything from that moment on happened in slow motion. Rick walked in carrying a large bouquet of flowers. "Lucy," I felt bad. His voice trailed off when he saw us. He looked at me and Stevens. "I came to pick you up for lunch to make up for a misunderstanding this morning," he said. He then looked at Stevens, who was so stunned. "I guess when you woke up this morning, you didn't think that by the end of the day you'd be fired, disgraced, divorced, and beaten, and you'd have another mouth to feed, right?" Rick asked. "Oh, please no," Stevens cried. "It's all her fault. I am a good person. I go to church. I have a wife and children." He approached Stevens very slowly. He didn't even look at me. He hit Stevens. I tried to grab Rick to keep him from doing this. "If you mean well, Lucy, don't touch me," he said. "You better pack your things and leave the house before I get back." "But we didn't have sex," Stevens moaned. "She's been walking around showing them to all the men in the office for the last few weeks. Bart is the one you should be worried about. I would never have done this if I hadn't caught him having sex with her. He did it, not me." Rick's neck turned towards me at a speed that seemed impossible. Then he looked back at Stevens. "Who is Bart?" he began. "Forget," he said. Then he left. He started to leave the office. "Where are you going?" Both Stevens and I asked at the same time. "I need to get a lawyer," he said. "Perhaps two, one for the case against your company and the other for the divorce." Stevens and I froze in shock when Rick left. The flowers he brought me were still on the floor. "You're fired," he said, holding his swollen jaw. "Who cares?" I said. "I now have bigger problems than this measly job. Good luck explaining that to your wife and the church." "Do you think there is a way to prevent this?" he asked. "Perhaps," I said. "He's very angry, but Rick is first and foremost reasonable. And if there's one thing I can always be sure of, it's that my husband loves me." "Then you're not fired yet," he said. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Aren't you going to work the rest of the day?" I noticed that even then, with his job and marriage hanging in the balance, he was still trying to look at my breasts. When I got home, Rick wasn't there yet. I sat down and waited for him. I took a couple of cold bottles of beer out of the refrigerator when I heard him drive up. "Why are you still here, Lucy?" he asked. I thought I was clear. "Why should I leave?" I asked. "This house belongs to both of us." "I'm leaving," he said. "I just wanted to stay in the house until the weekend so I could pack all my things. This way I will never have to come back here again. You can live here until the court decides what will happen to the house and who will get it. Most likely, we will have to sell it and split the proceeds." "I don't want to sell our house," I said, with the first tears starting to flow. "You can always buy my share," he said. "Rick, neither of us have that kind of money," I said. "And you know that even if you gave me a payment schedule, I wouldn't be able to meet the mortgage payments and pay you, plus all other bills. We need both incomes to make this work." He shrugged. "The last thing I expected to do today was discuss our divorce," he said. "Even your boss was given more choice in this matter than I was. He decided to hit on a married woman. You and him deserve all the pain possible. It took me by surprise." I nodded and wiped my tears. He either didn't notice or wasn't paying attention. "Rick, I love you so much. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. Yes, he said. Nothing other than not having sex with other guys. That's not how it happened, I said sharply. Can't we talk about this? After all the time we spent together, I can't believe you just want to leave me now. Lucy, this is not a case where talking will help, he said. This is a case where you can talk until you're blue in the face and it won't change anything. I probably won't be able to pack much tonight, so if you give your word that I can pack my things tomorrow, I'll listen. I don't want you to just listen to me, I said. I want us to talk like we always do. This won't work anymore, he said. Why? I asked. Because everything is different now, he said. We are not the same people. I felt like something was wrong ever since I found your pills. I thought maybe you just didn't want to have kids with me. So I decided that maybe I didn't want them either. But now at least I know why. So you have what you always wanted. You are happy. I deserve a chance at happiness too, don't I? What the hell are you talking about, Rick? I said. What am I not doing to make you happy? What do you need that you can't get from me? This is what I just realized I need, he said. I don't care, I said. I'll give you everything I can. What is this? Divorce, he said. Rick, look me in the eyes and tell me you don't love me anymore, I said. I can't, he said. That's why it's so difficult. I will probably love you forever, but we can't be together anymore. Rick, you have always been the most careful driver I know. You obey all speed limits, signs, and even the stupidest traffic rules. You've only had your Mustang for 3 months, and you've been stopped for speeding 4 times and received 2 tickets. Our insurance premiums have gone up 50% since you bought that car, I said. I had to get used to it, he said sheepishly. It's a different feeling knowing that I can pass most of the cars I'm next to. And sometimes I have to defend the brand from competitors. You know, Challengers, Chargers, Impalas, and those pesky Camaros. Rick, no one paid me any attention most of my life, I said. The only person who paid attention was you. But suddenly every man I met was interested in me. And now they can all be yours, he said. We will have papers signed next week, and we will never speak to each other again. You can find all the men you want. Rick, listen to me, I said. They are not interested in me. It took me a while to understand, but they don't really care about me. They are only interested in these breasts. They drive men crazy. I guess just as it took you a while to get used to your Mustang, I needed time to test drive those breasts. I wasn't worried about your fines, so. My fines didn't come between us, he said sharply. My fines did not violate our marriage vows. I don't remember promising to love, honor, obey, and keep the speed below 55 miles per hour. Lucy, you were the person I loved more than anything in the world. I'm not even sure I'll ever be happy without you in my life, but I'm going to try. You and your breasts can find all the men you want. But I only need you, I screamed. You always had me, he said. Before you betrayed me. Lucy, I loved you more than anything in the world. I loved you just the way you were. Your breasts, or lack thereof, meant nothing to me. You were mine. You were the most precious thing I had. Nothing else mattered. Do you know how many times my friends tried to set me up with someone else? I never cheated on you. I never thought about it. I didn't even flirt with anyone. And look where it got me. Rick, can't you forgive me? I begged. I forgive you, Lucy, he said, and I saw that he spoke sincerely. I'll do anything to fix this, I swear, I said. No man will touch me again. You can let as many men touch you as you want, he said. We will not be together. But why? I whined. It's not fair. You said you forgave me. I forgive you, Lucy, he said. I think deep down I know that you didn't mean to hurt me. But I'm so angry now that I can barely contain myself. At the same time, I feel like my heart is in my throat, and I really don't want to lose what we had. Then don't lose it, Rick, I said. I swear to you that none of those guys meant anything to me. You are the only man I have ever loved. We can do this somehow. No, Lucy, we can't, he said. Can we at least do this as adults? Don't try to contest the divorce, and it will be better and less painful for both of us. I think we can sleep in the house together for one night since it's getting late, but tomorrow please go away and give me some time. I promise to get out as quickly as possible. Why can't I stay while you pack? I asked. Because I'm trying to forget you, Lucy, he snapped. It's hard enough as it is. If you stay here, it will only get worse. And if I burst into tears, it will only give you more reasons to laugh. What are you talking about? I screamed. I love you, Rick. I never made fun of you. You must have laughed when you were with other men, he said and left. He spent the evening packing everything he wanted. He was absolutely serious about the divorce. I saw him holding back tears as he looked at some of the things we had collected over the years, but he didn't cry. A couple of times when I walked into the room, he asked if I wanted something. He took a lot of our photos, but I noticed that he didn't want to take photos that included me. I guess you don't want photos with me, right? I asked. Pictures of you before surgery would make me cry, he said. Photos of you after surgery would make me angry. Rick, why didn't you like my breasts? I asked. Before the operation, when I was flat as a board, you liked it. But after that, you didn't even accidentally touch her. Do you have some kind of flat chest fetish? If so, I'd like you to tell me. I love her as much as the next guy, he said. But these things are not part of you, and I love you. I will always be. You never needed those things for me. I married you long before you did, and I wanted to have children and spend my life with you. You didn't do these things for me. You didn't need them for me. So you must have made them for your other men. Let them enjoy them. I know this isn't what we planned, and I am very sorry that this happened. But I really hope you can be happy. He then stood up and continued packing. A couple of hours later, I cooked dinner. He thanked me, but refused to even sit down and eat with me. A little later, I got ready for bed. I met him as he came out of the shower, completely naked from the waist down. I covered my chest because I didn't want to turn him away. Either he didn't notice it or he didn't care. Rick, why do you have to leave? I asked him. I do not want you to leave. I want us to fight for our marriage. Sorry, I promised you to be civilized, but to hell with that. You won't leave me without a fight. Lucy, you can't force a person to stay married to you, he said. All you'll do is make it harder for us to communicate. You'll try to drag out the divorce or try to rip me off. In the end, I will ruin your reputation and we will end up apart anyway. We'll just both be broke and hate each other. It's not worth it. Can we make love one last time? I asked. I don't think so, he said. I don't know who else you slept with or what they might have. But if you want, you can call one of your guys and go see them if you need to. I bit my lip to keep from crying. Rick, I was completely wrong, but I am not a woman of easy virtue. Only one man actually slept with me, and only once. This one time was a mistake, and I immediately realized it. I'm not a woman of easy virtue. I just made one mistake, and you want to throw away everything we have. I'll quit my job. I will do everything. I looked at him. As I watched, a tear slowly rolled down his cheek. I suddenly realized that all this time I was only thinking about how much I wanted to stay with him. I completely ignored the fact that he had loved me for as long as I had loved him, and just as deeply. It was just as painful for him to part with me as it was for me. I stopped. I left the room and let him sleep. I went to the room where we kept the first aid kit. We had 3 or 4 rolls of medical bandage. I took them all and wrapped them around my chest as tightly as possible. I thought I should laugh, but it was too serious. I've heard of all kinds of women putting things in their bras to make their breasts look bigger, but I'm probably the first to try to make my breasts look smaller. When I finished, I stood in front of the mirror, naked except for bandages. Even wrapped so tightly, I couldn't make them flat. They were too big. I walked down the hallway into the living room and climbed onto the couch next to my sleeping husband. His eyes opened, and he began to protest. Rick, just give me one last time, I begged. Please, I will never ask you for anything again. I swear. This will be the last time I make love to a man, so let me have it. He looked into my eyes, and I almost managed not to cry. He did it. Then he got up and went to the bathroom. When he came out, he was fully dressed. He kissed me one last time before leaving. The last thing I remember was the sound of his Mustang driving away from the house. The next morning I went to work and was sent to Mr. Stevens' office. "How are you doing?" he asked nervously. "I didn't have time to ask him about you," I said. "But I really don't care. I guess I'll be fired, right?" Before he could answer, his secretary ran into the room. They exchanged a few tense words, and he ran out of the office. I followed him into the owner's office. The owner was rarely in the building, let alone his office. The door was open, and I noticed Stevens sitting nervously, and then he started crying. He stood up, and I saw Rick and the woman in the room. When Stevens left, he looked at me with hatred. "They want to see you now," he said. Rick and the woman came out as I entered the office. He didn't even look at me. I looked into the eyes of Mr. Parrish, the owner of our company. "Let's keep it short, Mrs. Enns," he said. "Your future ex-husband is suing my company for $3.5 million. Apparently, he thinks you're worth that much. He really thinks you're worth more. He's gone crazy. You're just another $2 prostitute with delusions of grandeur and big, obviously fake breasts. I can keep this case in court for years, but the publicity will probably ruin me. So I'll settle and pay him $500,000, $1 million at the most. His lawyer is a smart woman. She'll make sure I don't pay him until your divorce is finalized, so you won't get a penny. I like it. If you or any lawyer you hire ever asks about this conversation, I and every person in this room will swear it never happened. Naturally, you are fired. Now get your trailer ass out of my building. There will be no severance pay. Your benefits are canceled immediately, and we will hold your last paycheck. If someone calls us for a reference about your work, you will not be happy with what we say. I'm also going to consider suing you for damage to my company's reputation. I may not get much, but if I destroy you, it will be worth it." I left the office, and as I walked past the tables of people I had worked with for years, I noticed that most of them were laughing and pointing at me. Before I had breasts, these people were my friends. Now I have become a joke to them. I noticed Bart running into the office as I left. He looked at me angrily. "Tell your husband his ass is in danger if I lose my job," he said. I didn't go back for my things. I headed outside to try to find Rick. Apparently, Bart's meeting was even shorter than mine. 2 guards took him down the emergency elevator just as I was walking out the door. They threw him, cursing and screaming, to the ground. He saw something in the distance and stopped cursing at the guards, only to get up and run after what he saw. I looked in the direction he ran and realized that he was running after Rick. Rick suddenly stopped. He was waiting for Bart, and as soon as Bart got close to him, he hit him. Rick walked over and took something from Bart. Then he got into the car and drove away. 2 days later, one of the few friends who remained at her old job called me. She told me that Stephen's wife had come into the office the day before and demanded to know why he had been fired so suddenly after all his years of service to the company. She left the building in a rage and filed for divorce that same day. Bart's wife also filed for divorce. My friend told me that both women were visited by Rick. I was laughing. I thought both of those bastards deserved what they got. If they could control themselves, they would still be married. If I lose my marriage, everyone else should too. I made a list of all the other guys who played with me and started visiting their wives too. I wanted to help Rick in any way I could. A few days later, I was sitting in the kitchen in my depression. I hadn't told my parents yet and was hoping Rick would come home. The doorbell rang and I stood up to answer. A young woman stood at the door. She was chewing gum and looked bored. "How can I help?" I asked. "Are you Lucy Ants?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "Oh, okay," she said. "Can I see your documents? I have an invitation for you. It's from Rick." I suddenly became very happy. My prayer was answered. Rick wants to invite me to something. Maybe he has changed his mind and wants to talk about saving our marriage. I showed her my driver's license. She handed me a stack of papers and I immediately realized that they were divorce papers. "I thought you said it was an invitation," I snapped. "This is the invitation, Skeletor," she said. "This is an invitation to court where he will get rid of your cheating ass." Then she left. The rest of the day was disgusting. I hired a lawyer who advised me to just accept Rick's offer. He wanted to split everything in half. This included the remaining lottery money and our savings, checking, and investments. This was more than fair, considering that I was making a little more than half of what Rick was making. I also noticed that there was no mention of any money from the lawsuit, if there was any. I told my lawyer to reject the offer and push for reconciliation. Rick was very kind. He never attacked me. He never threatened to expose what I did. Even when my parents called him, he would simply tell them that they should talk to me. I offered a consultation. He refused, but sent me a card and a birthday present. This alone made me realize that I was being childish and selfish, so even though I loved him, I gave in and let the divorce go through. Things really got bad for me the day the divorce was finalized. I spent most of the morning crying. A little after noon, I heard the exhaust system of Rick's Mustang drive away from the house. I still haven't moved out of the house, even though it was sold and Rick and I got our money. I went out onto the porch and picked up the envelope. It was a handwritten letter from Rick. He thanked me for the years we spent together and for all the love I gave him. He said he still loved me and was sorry we couldn't be together anymore. He asked me to remember that I needed to live my life and that our breakup was not only caused by what I did, but also by his inability to deal with it. He asked me to forgive him for his harshness and inflexibility and wished me to find love and happiness with someone else, better than him. I cried for 3 days straight. I returned to our hometown for Thanksgiving. I was sure that he would go home to his parents. I also had to finally tell my parents the truth about what I had done to destroy our marriage. I ran all over town looking for him, convinced that he was home for Thanksgiving too. I saw one of his sisters and demanded that she tell me who he brought home for the holiday and if he was dating anyone. She called me a psychopath and said I deserved to be unhappy. Returning home, I met several of our old friends and neighbors. None of them even wanted to talk to me. I also started dating. Most of the guys I dated were terrible. All they wanted was sex. They were more interested in my breasts than in me. I had sex with several of them, hoping it would be the start of a deeper relationship. But that never happened. The most humiliating moment came when I went to the ladies' room and came back to hear my boyfriend tell the waiter that the only reason he was dating me was because his friend told him I had amazing breasts and sex is so-so. He just wanted to try. I was supposedly an easy target, and he gave the waiter my number, but asked not to call me for a week so that he could play enough. I was in so much pain that I just went home. I didn't even return to the table. When he called me later that night, I simply told him that I had overheard his conversation and hung up. A few minutes later, the phone rang again, and I started screaming into the phone. But it wasn't that bastard, it was Rick. "I'm sorry," Rick said, and I started crying. "Lucy, how are you?" he asked. As always, he took care of me first. "Not really," I replied. "Lucy, you won't find who I'm dating," he began. "And she's lucky," I snapped, "because I'll rip her hair out when I find her." "Lucy, you won't find her," he repeated. "So you love this bitch more than you already love me," I hissed. "Lucy, you're going crazy trying to find someone who doesn't exist," he said. "A lot of my friends tried to set me up with someone, but I didn't go on a single date the entire year we were apart. And as for the one I love, unfortunately for me, it's still you." I realized that he was telling the truth and started crying again. He made me feel cheap again. During our separation, I went on dates at least twice a month and slept with half of these guys, trying and failing to find someone who would make me feel the same way he did. Maybe I really am a woman of easy virtue. His call was meant to comfort me and encourage me to move on again, but all it did was make me even more upset. I started blaming myself again for ruining my happiness. But most of all, I began to blame my breasts. My life was wonderful until I had my breasts done. Breasts ruined my marriage and my life. They were evil. My parents sent me to therapy. The doctor began to understand that I began to hate myself. After several incidents, including a failed attempt at self-harm, he recommended what I secretly wanted anyway. I woke up in the hospital one morning and saw something I hadn't seen for years. My legs. My breasts were gone. 2 more surgeries were required. After the implants were removed, there was a lot of excess skin left where large breasts used to be. The second surgery removed excess skin, and the third surgery covered most of the scars from the previous surgeries. After a few months of therapy, I was able to function almost normally again. But I started to hate men. But that wasn't a problem. Without breasts, I became invisible to men. But that didn't bother me. A few months ago, I got a job at a bar, and other than the occasional single woman, no one here noticed or bothered me until tonight. I can't believe I asked Rick for sex. But if he accepts my proposal, I will have sex with him like there is no tomorrow. I watched his table and realized that he had not come here to have sex with these 2 women. Apparently, they were going to have one of those ceremonies that women have in states where same-sex marriage is illegal. I laughed, realizing how stupid I was. I noticed that Rick sometimes looked at me, and I began to hope that I had a chance. I also began to dream that he would take me back and we could start over. My fantasy lasted about 10 minutes before reality intervened. The door opened and a woman entered the room. She had incredible breasts and a thin waist. She had a big round butt and was really beautiful. She immediately went to Rick. This was expected. She walked right up to him, and his arm wrapped around her waist protectively, even as tears began to fall from my eyes. The pain only intensified. Rick walked up to the bar to order her a drink. She held his hand tightly, and he ordered for her. He ordered her sparkling water. While I was choosing one for her, she took his face with both hands and pulled him towards a kiss. I was so jealous that I was sure my face was turning red. She looked at me with the sweetest smile on her face, and they went back to their table. She had that extra gait with her butt shaking, and I couldn't stand it. I ran to the office in the back to cry alone. Knock, knock, I heard behind my sobs. Another bartender can take your order, I said. I looked up through a curtain of tears and noticed that it was her. Sorry, Lucy, she said. What I did was inappropriate, but you have to admit that you offended him greatly, and he didn't deserve it. I was a little shocked to see you for the first time after everything I'd heard. You don't look like he described you. So what happened to your balls? I just looked at her. She stood there like she was my best friend, and I didn't even know her. Why should I tell you anything about my life? I snapped. Don't you have to worry about your own life? Lucy, you're not really mad at me, she said. You're disappointed and angry at yourself for what you've done and the stupid decisions you've made. You and I have a lot in common. We must become friends. This bitch was clearly crazy. She had a man whom I loved more than anything in the world. I still wanted him. I would claw her eyes out without regret. You still love him, right? She said, smiling. After all this time, it's been 2 years now. Talk about carrying the torch. So what happened to the balls? You first, I said. He is happy. She gently stroked her belly and then looked at me. I think he will soon be even happier. You, I asked, and she smiled and nodded. My heart sank again. Is he the father? No other man has ever touched me, she said sharply, as if I had insulted her. Her reaction made me jealous again. You have to forgive him for acting childish around you. He never really got over you. He compares every woman he meets to you. It's your turn, she said. I really wanted to hear more about how he never got over me, but it was only fair that I tell her what she wanted to know. After our divorce, Rick just disappeared, I said. I didn't know how to live without him, so I started trying to find him. Do you know what it's like when you have someone in your life who loves you so much that you can see it in their entire body, and then you have no one to care about you? This is hell. Divorced or not, I wanted to find him and continue to fight for us, but he just disappeared. I even went to his parents for that first Thanksgiving and made a fool of myself in front of his sister. I noticed she smiled when I said that. I knew he was dating someone, I just didn't know who you were. And I think that's good, because maybe I would do something with you. She laughed when I said this. Basically, I got so angry that I decided there were plenty of fish in the sea and I'd just find someone else. So I started dating. It took me a while to realize that probably 90% of guys are only interested in a quickie. As soon as they received it, they disappeared. Most men were simply attracted to my breasts, but not to me. They reminded me of dogs chasing cars. They run along the road, barking and making all this noise, but when they catch up with the car, they don't know what to do with it. They can't drive it. I was getting all this attention on my breasts, but once the guys got them, they didn't know what to do with me. Most of them didn't want me. If they could just grab two breasts on a plate and feel them, they would grab the breasts and just ignore me. Maybe guys should just get breast implants so they can sit around and feel them all day. She laughed. Then I realized that the only man I had ever known who wasn't like that was Rick. He loved me before I had surgery, and when I remembered that all our problems started when I had the operation, I began to hate my breasts. I'm a smart girl. I know the breasts didn't cause my problems. I know these are people, and it was mostly my own reaction to them that lost me my husband. But I didn't really want them anymore. I went a little crazy for a while, and the therapist at the clinic my parents put me in actually removed them. End of story. Now I am again the same as I was. I'm older, I'm smarter, and I know the value of what I lost. I really have no one to blame for my situation. It's like that old Mariah Carey song. I had it all, but I let it slip away. Honey, you'll be okay, she said. You never know how and when love will show itself. Sometimes the people we love are not the ones meant for us, and sometimes we just have to wait for the right person to come along. Sometimes when they come, we are too stupid to understand it. But there's someone for all of us. We just have to be willing to love and be loved. I think you're ready now. The person meant for you can now find you. You are dying? I asked her. She looked at me with a crazy look. Why do you ask? She said. Well, don't get me wrong, I said, but this way I could be with the one who is meant for me. We'll be great friends, she said. I doubt it very much, I said, but I said it with a smile, although that's what I meant. I just couldn't be friends with a bitch who had the man I loved. Oh, and since we're friends, there may come a day when I have to ask you to do something that you probably won't like. But just remember that you owe me, she said. She pointed a finger at me for effect. I was left wondering what the hell she was talking about as I watched her perfect ass move away from me. I felt better after our conversation and returned to the bar. Before the evening was over, most of the tables in the bar had been pushed together and the entire place had turned into a pre-wedding party for the ladies' couple that Rick and his girlfriend had come to support. When the bar closed, I felt like I was ready to cry again. Deborah, Rick's woman, came over to say goodbye to me. Goodbye, darling, she said and winked at me. I remembered all her nonsense about how the right love would find me, and I hoped that she was right, but I really couldn't imagine myself being happy with someone else. Despite all her attempts to be nice to me, Rick didn't say a word to me. It seems he just wanted to twist the knife. As I walked to my crappy car in the pre-dawn darkness, I was both happy and sad. Seeing Rick again gave me a reason to smile. He was just as sweet as before, and it brought back fond memories. On the other hand, I was really sad because he continued to live without me. He had a woman who clearly loved him and a child on the way. These were two of his three big dreams for an ideal life. Rick never wanted to be rich or famous. All he ever wanted was a woman who would love him, her family, and a Mustang GT. I always wanted and thought that I would be this woman. Hell, I was that woman until I ruined everything. It's good that he was able to move on and find his dream with someone else. A menacing roar tore me out of my thoughts, and suddenly headlights, bright as the sun, blinded me. The car's engine was so powerful that it seemed to shake the car like some barely controlled beast contemplating whether to eat the smaller animal or let it go. The door opened and a figure stepped out of the car. "Sit down," he said. "What?" I asked. "I've decided to accept your offer," he said. I remembered asking him for sex earlier in the evening and even telling him that he would not get sex from a female couple. But that was before I found out about his pregnant girlfriend. "Rick, what about?" I started. "Are you sitting down or not?" he asked. I thought about this for a long time. I decided that whether I liked Deborah or not, I really liked her. I liked her more than I should have. But at the same time, my heart, my body, my mind, and every cell of my being wanted my husband back. I'm not the kind of girl who sleeps with other people's men or follows them around, but damn, I've done it before. All the guys who played with my breasts were married, so maybe this won't be anything new. In fact, it will be different. Rick was the man I loved more than anything in the world. I often told him that I would do anything for him. This decided my case. If I had a chance to be with him, even if it was just one night, I had to take it. I felt sorry for Deborah, but I couldn't say no. I was worried that Rick was cheating on her, but there may have been circumstances that I didn't know. Maybe he loved me and wanted me back, and this was our only chance to be together again. It would probably only be one night, but if you lost someone you love and fate gave you the chance to spend another night in their arms, how many of us would actually say no? "Yes," I said. I walked around the front of the car and got inside. The skin was so soft and comfortable that I felt like I was in heaven. "Rick, I don't have breasts anymore," I said, hoping he wouldn't be disappointed. "Oh, as if I didn't notice," he said. "Lucy, my favorite part of you has always been your eyes." "Rick, I have scars where they were removed," I began. I had to hold on to the door handle as Rick slammed on the brakes, grabbed the handbrake, and turned the steering wheel, causing the car to spin and come to an abrupt stop. "Lucy, if you don't want to do this, I can take you back," he said, looking at me. "No, please no," I said, and an evil smile curved his lips. "Rick, you can do whatever you want with me, whenever you want, wherever you want. All you have to do is call me. I just want to be a part of your life again in any way possible." He shook his head and started the engine again. He got onto the freeway and drove out of town. I wondered where we were going, but didn't ask because I didn't want him to stop and offer to take me back. We drove through the gate, and he waved to the guard. I looked around, and even in the dark, I saw that the houses were beautiful. The landscape around us was magnificent, and each house was unique. Unlike the suburbs near me where there were small twin houses, there were houses here. Each has been designed to showcase the taste and style of its owner. The garage door opened as we pulled up, although Rick kept his hands on the steering wheel and gear shift. The garage door closed behind us, and as we walked out of the garage, the lights came on, illuminating the beautiful deck with a small pool and spa. We entered the house, and I looked around. Rick took off his shoes just like he did when we were together. No matter what people say, it is the small gestures that make people dear to us. Watching Rick perform this familiar yet annoying move made me smile. I started to reach out to him. I felt like I couldn't hold back any longer. He turned and looked at me. "You just came from work," he said. "You are hungry?" I nodded. "It's too late to go and buy something," he frowned. "Whatever is in the fridge will work for me," I said. He immediately smiled. "But not pizza," I said. He nodded. I should have guessed. Pizza was all Rick ever wanted to eat. When we were together, I always bought him pizza for his birthday instead of a cake. "Okay," I frowned, as if I didn't want to eat it. Internally, I began to glow. Rick did it to me again. He was always so damn caring. He brought me a plate with a few pieces and my favorite drink. I was surprised he even remembered it. He sat next to me, and we ate without saying a word. He finished his pizza in 2 seconds, while I ate mine slowly. His presence made the pizza especially delicious. He stood up and came up behind me. It seemed like I was in heaven. "Are you ready to go to bed?" he asked. I simply nodded. He took me by the hand and led me up a long staircase. I liked what I could see in his room in the low light. He began to take off his clothes and, as usual, threw them everywhere. When we were together, we agreed that if he couldn't put it in the laundry basket, he would at least put it in one small place. "Rick," I started. He looked at me. "I have scars on my..." He shut me up by placing a finger on my lips. I got into bed, and it was wonderful. Rick, I started. You haven't been with anyone for over a year. We've been apart for 2 years, he said. Sorry, I don't want to remember the past. I just want to enjoy the present. Rick, I'm glad you care, I said. Can I tell you everything now? I felt his arms hugging me like before, and I thought it was heaven. I closed my eyes and told him everything that had happened since we broke up. I explained my reasons, including why I had the implants removed. Lucy, my time has not been spent on some journey of self-discovery or self-awareness like yours. I didn't check out a bunch of people to see if I could find someone else. I just lived day by day, he said. I thought maybe he didn't want to share his experience with me. It made me feel like I was just a toy for him. He hugged me even tighter to him, and I felt incredibly happy. He reached for the chest of drawers, and I thought that he would take out the means of protection against diseases, like last time. Rick, you don't need this. I swear I haven't been with anyone in over a year, I said. You won't catch anything from me. What about what you might catch from me? He asked. If you have something, I will accept it, I said. And yes, it sounded stupid even to me, but it was true. Lucy, what about the fact that you might get pregnant? He asked. You know I'm capable of this. Rick, I would love to have a little piece of you to remember you by, I said. Lucy, what are you talking about? He asked. Why do you think I brought you here? You decided to take me up on my offer, I said. Though with Deborah, you really don't need me. He simply laughed, as if agreeing with me. I felt terrible. Why does he need me if he has her? She is prettier, has a feminine figure, and is expecting a child. Then he turned over and started kissing me. And we made love. When I woke up the next morning, Deborah looked at us with disgust on her face. When she saw that I woke up, she looked at me. Have you left any strength for him? She asked, shaking her head. Rick woke up hearing her voice. I really hope you're both going to shower and get dressed before you go to breakfast, she said and walked out, slamming the door. Rick started laughing. I just looked stunned. Sorry, he said with an amused look on his face. Is she angry? Are we in big trouble? I asked. I didn't want to ruin your relationship. She's always grumpy in the morning, he laughed. She's pregnant. We better take a shower and get dressed. We jumped into the shower. He used the shower in the room, and I went down the hall. I had to put on my clothes from yesterday, but I didn't care. I didn't care. I didn't care that I spent the night in bed with Rick and his girlfriend walked in on us. I didn't care that I was walking around in the clothes I'd worn the entire previous day, with obviously dirty panties in my pocket. I was in heaven. As we sat down at the table, Deborah looked at me. Eat, she ordered. I heard it won't help, but try it. After last night, you'll need some nutrition. You seem to really enjoy it. I really liked it, I said, smiling. It was the best night of my life, and despite how wrong it was, I don't regret a second. She looked at me, then at Rick. A strange look flashed between them. Honey, what are you talking about? She asked. Well, I know Rick is your man now, I said, and I don't want to come between you. But you already know that I love him and need him more than air. I know you two are expecting a baby, and I shouldn't have those thoughts in my head, but if he calls me, I'll be there. Doesn't matter. She just looked at me and laughed. Whatever, she said, mimicking my voice and intonation. You should stand and put your hand on one of your skinny thighs when you say that, she laughed. I'm confused, Lucy, she said finally. Why would he need to call you? She then looked at Rick, and he laughed too. You're an asshole, she said, laughing even more. You haven't told her yet. I looked at her with her beautiful face and huge breasts that made me envious, and then at Rick, who seemed very interested in his bacon. He raised his head and shrugged. I tried to tell her twice last night, he said, but she was only interested in sex. If I hadn't given it to her, who knows what she could have done. What the hell do you two mean? I asked. They looked at each other again and laughed. Lucy, what makes you think I brought you here last night? Asked Rick. You decided to take me up on my offer, I said. Though with Deborah, you really don't need me. He just laughed, as if he agreed with me. I felt terrible. Why does he need me if he has her? She is prettier, has a feminine figure, and is expecting a child. Deb and I are very close. I'm her brother, he said, smiling. You? I started, but he interrupted me. She's expecting a baby, but it's for Ginny, he said. Ginny? Who is Ginny? I asked. My sister. You went to school with her. She's in the Navy. You made a fool of yourself in front of her last Thanksgiving. She laughed until she cried, he said. And what does this have to do with Deborah? I asked. All. They are together and want children, he said. Then why did you want me? I asked. Because I love you, stupid, he said, smiling. Oh, I said, smiling too. But Rick, You are perfect for me, as always, he finished. So what should I do now? I asked. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know what exactly. Go back to bed with you, I blurted out. First of all, he said, smiling, what do you want to do in life? What do you want me to do? I asked. Get your things together. Move out of your apartment. Quit your job and pick up where we left off, he said. Rick, are you serious? I asked, with eyes full of tears. He nodded. Well, I need time to think about it. This is a really big step. It would be a big change in my lifestyle, and, okay, I thought, I agree, I screamed, jumping into his arms. Wait a minute, Deborah said. There are 3 conditions you must accept. Yes, yes, and yes, I said. Lucy, you better listen to them first, she said. I said that you owe me, and now you are connected with my son-in-law. Okay, hurry up so I can agree, I said. First of all, you must never have sex with anyone but him again for the rest of your life, she said. I agree, I quickly replied. Write this on the contract, and I will sign it in blood. What's next? You must marry me again, he began. Try to stop me, I replied. The last one is the hardest, Deborah said. Ginny and I want to have 2 children. In a year or year and a half, when she gets back from deployment, I want to get pregnant again so she can be here full time. It will only take 1 or 2 tries over a few months. I wouldn't ask, but Rick already promised before I made him give you back. There was silence in the room. I'll be Aunt Lucy, right? I asked slowly. And your child will play with our children. My kids will need a very skinny aunt, she said. So I agreed to that too. This will be the best thing I've ever done, I began. Shut up, they both laughed. I don't know why fate decided to give me another chance. I know I don't deserve this, but I cling to him with both hands and feet. I will never, ever even look at another man. Life without Rick makes no sense to me. I count my blessings every day that he loved me enough to forgive me. Rick and I got married again. We have 2 children, and we see his 2 nephews often. He's still shy and handsome, and I'm still thin and flat-chested, but he loves me like there's no tomorrow. In the words of the immortal Howard the Duck, love is a strange thing, baby. But I will accept it. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. 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 Click to